Have you ever watched a show that instantly captivated you in ways that other shows didn't? A show that quickly charmed and reminded you on why you watch anime in the first place. A show that, within the first few minutes, immediately grabbed your attention with something astonishing that appealed to you. Depending on your taste in anime, shows like this are very rare to come across. I've only managed to come across shows like this periodically in time. Some examples of these shows are Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, and Black Lagoon. Not only did these shows captivate me into an everlasting fascination with the anime medium, they also created an acquired taste that will become a principal standard in my future preferences, and this acquired taste exemplified my attraction to GANGSTA. Based on the manga by Kosuke, GANGSTA was produced in 2015 by Studio Manglobe and was directed by Shukei Murase, who was, up until this point, best known for his works on features such as Samurai Champloo and Ergo Proxy. He was joined by other prolific team members such as character designer Yoichi Udawa, music composer Tsuchi, series compositor Shinichi Inosume, and series director Yoichi Hatsumi. The best way I could describe the appeal of GANGSTA is it's like the simplicity and clarity of a Shinichiro Watanabe production mixed with the atmospheric presentation of 91 Days. GANGSTA is beautiful. It's compelling, captivating, and most definitely unique. Every single aspect of GANGSTA is treated with equal consideration and exertion. From the atmospheric environment, appealing character designs, simplistic yet moody ethereal backgrounds, to the absolutely wonderful soundtrack. GANGSTA has almost an harmonious quality to it. The animation, direction, visuals, and soundtrack works well enough with each other to create a distinctive ambience and atmosphere unique only to GANGSTA. When you instantly hear a title like GANGSTA, you automatically invoke an illustration of money, sex, power, and violence. And as fortune would have it, that's exactly what GANGSTA is. From the use of vulgar, profane language, uncondensed, explicit violence, to the use of immeasurable, extensive abusive scenes, GANGSTA is an anime that constrains no limitations in its endless use of intensity. The series revolves around the story of Warwick Arcangelo and Nicholas Brown, two handymen who takes on jobs for both the mob and the police force that no one else can handle, and Alex, a former prostitute who eventually tags along with Warwick and Nicholas. Throughout the series, we get a better understanding of each character's backstory and how they interact with the world around them. The story of GANGSTA may not be one that appeals to everybody. It's not one of those anime that's over the top or reality breaking. Instead, GANGSTA is an anime that uses a realistic, mature themed approach to tell its narrative that not everyone will find suitable towards their taste. But this, however, doesn't take away from the enjoyment that you will find within the series. The show isn't a masterpiece by any means, but it's definitely a series that takes a unique approach in the medium. The story of GANGSTA is set in a fictional city of Argustalum, a dog-eat-dog world structured on a foundation of corruption and crime that is ruled by power, control, and fear. The city itself is a real main character, in a way that it looks and feels like a real, lived-in world full of crime, drugs, crooked cops, and gangs. It is a world rich in detail and history, with depictions of ruthlessness, violentness, and discrimination. From first glance, GANGSTA may not seem all that visually appealing. The world isn't an extravagant setting. The city isn't lively or full of energy. The overall atmosphere feels desolate, bland, boring, and dull. Buildings look old and rugged, streets are full of cracks, abandoned buildings occupy most of the city, dark corridors and alleyways provide a gloominess and lifeless feel, and filth is plagued all throughout the environment. Crime has polluted the city to the point where there's seemingly no existence of civilization, excluding the criminals and gangsters. While the city is mostly hollow and lifeless, you do have your typical atmospheric lifeful buildings such as clubs and brothels that perfectly illuminates the city and provides it with the zest in order to furnish it with life. In the world of GANGSTA, there's almost not a single character that seems to obtain any form of morality or decency for humanity. Practically, every character in the show performs actions that benefits their personal desires and own well-being, which exhibits just how much the city of Argustalum has impacted the beliefs of majority of its inhabitants. However, this environment blends in perfectly with the narrative, because it shows just how much crime has polluted the city and how Argustalum isn't just a city, but rather a force that seemingly no one can escape from. One of the more refreshing parts of the show is how the characters and their actions seem true to life, realistic, and more importantly, adult. As I mentioned earlier, GANGSTA presents itself with content that can be described as adult themed. When I say adult, I don't necessarily mean adult as in excessive violence or immense sex scenes. While the show isn't shy about making violence happen on screen, the adult themed content comes from the psychological struggles of the main cast. Each character suffers from some form of trauma, depression, or mental and physical abuse that provide these characters with authentic elements to make them feel whole. GANGSTA treats its protagonists with dignity, affording them nuanced portrayals that you rarely see elsewhere in anime. For example, Alex suffers from anxiety and PTSD due to the abuse she suffered from sex trafficking, sexual abuse, and prostitution. As a result, she lost all of her memories of who she was before and entered a state of blankness, having nothing in her life to look forward to. Another correlation that can be caused from her abuse is her unwillingness to put trust into other people, more specifically, men. Alex is fearful to be around men since it was the constant abuse and violence that men inflicted upon her. This is why at first, Alex displays her hesitations and skepticisms when Warwick and Nicholas takes her in, struggling to accept them as being genuine, sincere guys who has no intentions of harming her. Nicholas was born deaf, having to use sign language to communicate, and suffers from the physical and mental abuse that his father and other mercenaries inflicted on him as a young child, which led to his aloof and introverted nature. Warwick has a nihilistic view on the world, a view he facades behind his humorous and good-natured personality, which is probably a direct result of the constant abuse that his family heaped on him, causing him to believe that life as a whole has no meaning. The distinction between these characters helps to show immensely, allowing it to be incredibly immersive as an adult-themed show. One thing I really enjoyed about GANGSTA is how the way the characters of the show develop with each other in such a short amount of time. The chemistry between Warwick and Nicholas is undeniably astonishing. GANGSTA is one of the few anime shows that I've watched that immediately captivated me with the connection between both main protagonists. The dynamic between Nicholas and Warwick is certainly unique. Their personalities contrast, but the charisma between the two definitely creates a bond that's pretty much intangible, almost as if their personalities cannot exist without the others. Warwick's friendlier personality balances out Nicholas's more disinterested personality, creating an energetic and effective relationship between the two. They seem to have this weird, codependent but also complex relationship. While the two have been lifelong partners and can be considered best friends, Warwick has a somewhat conflicted opinion of Nicholas. I'm not going to explain why he has this conflicted opinion of Nicholas due to me releasing spoilers, but I will say that it's a very surprising reveal. Then we enter the relationship between Warwick, Nicholas, and Alex. Alex certainly provides a new dynamic in the relationship between the main crew. Since Warwick and Nicholas have been handyman for a long duration of time, they have developed almost this immunity to human morality and compassion for human life, with the exception of those who they are close to. As seen multiple times throughout the show where they inhumanely slaughter and murder countless amounts of people with no remorse. This could be another development from the abuse that they suffered in their upbringing, which in effect resulted in this emotionless and apathetic attitude when killing. However, while Warwick and Nicholas seem to lack compassion for human life, Alex, on the other hand, is more humane and sympathetic when it revolves around humanity. She rejects the aspect of people losing their lives and demonstrates a more softness at the idea of killing, crumbling down into tears when witnessing Warwick and Nicholas slaughter several men right in front of her. What Warwick and Nicholas lacks in morality, Alex makes up for it with her denial to accept participating in bloodshed and by expressing her sentiments for humanity. Another interesting thing that really stood out to me is how the characters have unique personality traits that distinguishes them from each other. Characterization is a monumental factor that stimulates some of the most interesting components that crystallizes this series. Let's look at Warwick for example. Despite the show's dark and gritty nature, Warwick stands out because of his cheerful and animated personality. In a world full of suffering and pain, he always seems to have this easygoing charisma that contrasts everyone else's more depressing and dispiriting personalities. Despite Warwick's laid-back and light-hearted personality, he's still a man troubled and conflicted by his past. Warwick can easily be comparable to another protagonist who shares some of his similar characteristics in the form of Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop. These characters can be considered comparable in the sense that, while both men present themselves as unbothered, trouble-free individuals, they're both still haunted by their past in which they can't forget or seem to escape from. While his counterpart Nicholas is presented in a more withdrawn and reserved sense. He rarely communicates with anyone and often stays to himself, presenting himself as a loner that introverts and detaches himself from society and human connection. However, Nicholas also displays a certain trait that differentiates himself from his fellow companions. There are times throughout the series where Nicholas displays sociopathic tendencies, hinting that he may own a sadistic side. He enjoys slaughtering his victims mercilessly and relishes in the opportunity to fight at any given chance. He seems to be most alive when on the battlefield, expressing a vivid range of animated and spirited expressions to exemplify his thirst for the thrill of blood. Despite these sociopathic impulses, Nicholas still displays forms of compassion and sympathy, furthering providing depth in his complex personality. Alex, on the other hand, is exhibited with the melancholy and sorrowful nature. She presents herself as a lost, wandering soul with no purpose or meaning in life. She is bestowed as a motionless, lifeless character in the show that carries this representation of loneliness, misery, and sorrow. She's often presented with the posture that describes her as being fearful and afraid. She tends to have a look of unhappiness and sadness on her face, possibly because of how much damage she's been through in the past. Alex is miserable. She's sad, clueless, lifeless, and believes she has no purpose for existing. She questions purpose and what's the meaning behind everyone's intentions and actions to justify humanity and the behavior of humans. She's a character searching for all the answers in her life while in the midst of finding herself and her true identity. Even though these characters have contrasting personality traits, they blend in perfectly with the show to create an effective narrative that works well with the show's intentions. In all of this time, we haven't really touched on what can be considered the main plot of GANGSTA, and that is racism. Racism is a key element that can be considered to be one of the essential plots of the show. When I mention racism, I'm not discussing racism towards a certain skin color or a different religion, but I'm simply referring to racism towards people of a different race without having a different skin color nor a different religious belief. The race I'm referring to are the Twilights. Throughout the series, we learn more about these Twilights. They are children and descendants of those who used the Celebrate drug, which is a drug created during the war in order to enhance the speed and strength of soldiers. Twilights are also called tagged because they are registered and controlled since birth by using tags embedded with chips that monitor their vital signs. Despite having supernatural abilities, there are various mental and physical disorders that Twilights possess, known as compensations, which makes their lives much more difficult and results in shorter lifespans. Nicholas, one of our central protagonists, is a Twilight, and his compensation was him being born deaf. Twilights are portrayed throughout the series to be violent monsters who face discrimination all the time. Twilights are generally despised, not being allowed to enter some restaurants, bars, and aren't even allowed to walk the main streets, being forced into alleyways. They are looked down upon by normal people and often used as toys or slaves for fights and prostitution. Twilights are usually desired for their use as weapons. The discrimination for Twilights is probably born from an inferiority complex or fear, which is a thing that can be easily related to our real-world conflicts. Now, with a somewhat better understanding of GANGSTA, you can see why this series doesn't fit into the stereotypical medium that anime is associated with. GANGSTA combines real-world elements and tackles the issues in a perspective that some may not recognize at first glance. While the series isn't a deep, philosophical anime, it's not afraid to discuss important topics that's normally not presented in other anime. I guess in this part of the video, I'll discuss the animation and soundtrack. GANGSTA's visuals are thematically good matches to the tone of the series. I really like the visual style that Manglobe incorporated into this show. The use of shadowy colors such as gray and black creates an atmosphere that perfectly describes the nitty and gritty narrative of the story. Shuko Murase was responsible for bringing the artistic tone of the show to life. His trademark style, blending neo-gothic aesthetics and Vogue-like character models to create a kind of occult aura which he previously showcased with Ergo Proxy and Witch Hunter Robin, stumbled his way into GANGSTA and adjusted to the show's more urban style of nature to a much lesser degree without losing any attention to detail. On certain occasions, you'll typically see inconsistencies within the show, such as repeated usage of frames and background characters having the same facial designs. However, these inconsistencies are really displayed throughout the show, so they don't really have a huge impact in affecting the series as a whole. Design-wise, most of the characters look really good. Every now and then you may see your occasional stiff, disoriented character animated with jankiness, but other than that, the series does a fantastic job in separating each character and giving them their own unique body traits and character designs. Each character has a distinctive feature that makes them stand out more apparently from other characters. From Warwick's eye patch, gentle stubble, and flashy smile, Nicholas's spiky black hair, short stature, and muscular frame, to Alex's blue eyes and envious attractive figure. Each character possesses qualities that provide them with unique illustrations and character designs. The fight scenes in this show are really decent as well. The intensity you see as swords clash together and guns creating a beautiful animation when firing bullets creates some of the most visually stunning scenes in this show. Each action scene has a character develop a new facial expression that expresses just how serious these battles truly are within that moment. For example, look at how the face of Nicholas becomes more sadistic and terrifying as he prepares to fight in this scene. It's little moments like this that really brings out the satisfaction that I have with this anime. While the soundtrack isn't quite memorable, I personally find it to be very overlooked and to an extent underappreciated. It fits in really well with the show's presentation. With a unique blend of jazz, lo-fi, and hip-hop, it's really hard to ignore just how wonderful the soundtrack in the show is. Masterful piano and string performances effortlessly capture the emotion of GANGSTA, and you can feel the amount of passion that the composers and artists dedicated in their music. Even through the most intensive scenes, the music is very relaxing and flows perfectly with the visuals and the story being told during that scene. A key artist that I mentioned earlier, who may be recognizable, is Tsuchi. He is known for helping to produce one of the best, if not the best, anime soundtrack of all time, Samurai Champloo. His special blending of hip-hop mixed with a variety of kicks and claps helped create an unusually distinct soundtrack that seamlessly flows almost perfectly within the show. One of the more versatile and one of my personal favorite tracks in the show has to be the ending theme. For an anime that has very dark themes, you would expect an ending that's gloomy and carries the atmosphere of the nature of the show. Oddly enough, the ending isn't what you would anticipate it to be. It's very emotional, beautiful, and evokes a sense of loneliness that perfectly conveys the meaning of calm after the storm. Singing with an emotional passion, Annabelle's vocals on the tracks are simply marvelous and glorious. Overall, the ending captures the emotions that's presented through the series in a more melodic and majestic form. Even though it's a sad ballet that reflects on the emotional struggles and challenges that the characters are faced with, it still manages to find a way to somehow create a beauty within that struggle of sadness. A common negative that I tend to see about the show is its pacing. While the world and its characters are generally interesting, the show can lumber along at times and fail to keep up appeal moment to moment. Many times there are slow, methodical scenes which seem to be there just to pad out the runtime to make the show feel longer. It develops what would otherwise be an engaging show into something which is interesting, but not necessarily compelling all the time. However, in my opinion, the pacing perfectly fits the tone of the series. The pacing felt more cinematic and made things like plot points developing and the building of the world feel much more natural. These drawn-out scenes provide the characters with more development that contributes to establishing more background knowledge and meaning behind their personalities. If it wasn't for these slow, methodical scenes, the show wouldn't have the same impact when it comes to showcasing the behavior, interactions, and growth of the main cast. One of the most important aspects when creating any kind of media is creating a pace that fits the stylistic tone of that particular series. Finding a correct balance of pacing can play a fundamental part in what creates an anime's atmosphere and overall portrayal. While GANGSTA is a beautiful piece of work, it does suffer from its flaws, and one of these flaws potentially outweighs all of the positives of the entire series. One of the more unfortunate downfalls of the series is its abrupt ending. The show teased a whole bunch of manga plots and characters before abruptly concluding it off with a cliffhanger. And that's a shame because this anime's real only downside is that it ends without any real ending. We're introduced to a plethora of completely new characters only to have the series unceremoniously get cancelled. While these new characters are certainly interesting and offer a lot of promise, it's such a tragedy that we never get to see them in full effect. While the manga is still ongoing, it takes constant long hiatuses due to the fact that the author is constantly dealing with health issues. Due to the severity and chronic nature of her illness, she is prone to being hospitalized, which decreases the amount of content that she can produce, which is a huge bummer because Kosuke is a very hard-working woman and takes pride in putting her complete effort into her work. Judging by Kosuke's work ethic, I can firmly say that if she had the ability to, I'm pretty sure that she would continue the manga with only her teeth and the use of her head at this point. The only times GANGSTA ever stopped publication was when Kosuke was physically unable to finish a manuscript in time. And it's very sad to see an author not being able to express their creativity to the world due to something that is beyond their control. Fortunately for us fans, Kosuke is open about her condition and frequently tweets about how she's feeling, keeping us informed on her personal well-being and potential new material for the series. Whether or not GANGSTA can actually be considered a good show depends on what's your expectations when defining something as actually good. While I generally believe that GANGSTA is a great approach to the medium, most fans would argue that it's quite lackluster when compared to other shows. Ultimately, GANGSTA had a lot of interesting ideas and even potentially interesting characters, but none of that really matters if it's not taken advantage of to its fullest potential. It's really heartbreaking seeing what GANGSTA ultimately turned out to be, given all the untapped potential it had flowing from it. And I believe this is what causes the negative reception that's commonly referred to with the show. The abrupt ending has assured that it'll be more despised and loathed than remembered with warm and fond memories. And while these negatives notably harm the show, perhaps the most disheartening thing about the show is that it serves as Manglow's farewell performance since the studio went bankrupt and disbanded right before they could continue the series. Manglow produced some of my favorite anime ever, and it's really sad seeing the potential of GANGSTA wasted and the studio ending in such an inelegant manner. However, these negatives or faults shouldn't take away from the enjoyment that the series has to offer. The series receives a lot of hate mainly because how it ended, but we can't really stab the show with a dagger for its collapse. After all, it was never the source material's fault for its unfortunate demise. The stab of bankruptcy was too harsh with the series, and it left a bad perception on most of the fans. Sure, the show is far from perfection, but that doesn't mean it's not filled with certain features that provides new substance within the medium. GANGSTA isn't your typical anime. It's an anime that shouldn't be taken at face value. If you look at it from the context of your thoughts and imaginings, you'll miss out on the grand scheme of meanings and understandings behind the superficial appearance. GANGSTA is an anime about all the little scars that life inflicts on you and how at certain times we're all looking for ways to survive. This is why Warwick, Nicholas, and Alex mesh together so perfectly. While each character possesses individual qualities that separates them, they all possess one particular quality in common: their brokenness. They're all broken individuals who rely on each other's company in order to cope with that sense of brokenness. The relationships that these characters build throughout the series is a way to find hope and meaning in life, despite their depressing past. Ward, Nicholas, and Alex all mirror each other. Together, their past is filled with pain of all different sorts. Pain whose scars does not easily subside. GANGSTA is a show that isn't afraid to take risks in presenting tough subject matter in order to present themes in a more subtle, underlying approach. It's a show that portrays realistic and mature content through dark and heartbreaking themes. GANGSTA is a beautiful, sad story of suffering, misery, and our inabilities to escape the dark, vivid, painful memories of our past. So hey guys, I just want to say, if you're still at this point in the video and you haven't turned the video off yet, I just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in to this video and, helping me get started on my YouTube career. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I never really had the resources, the funds, or the materials to actually start my YouTube channel. But, this is the perfect time right now for me to invest in this stuff, especially with the quarantine and lockdown stuff going on. I'm using this this quarantine to me is kind of like a blessing in disguise to me, in the sense that it's providing me with the free time and like the resources and the time that I need to actually get up off of my feet and use this time as a beneficiary and actually get stuff done. Before this, I didn't really have any time or any way to actually start a YouTube channel. But with this quarantine stuff, it's providing me with the resources that I need to actually start on my lifelong dream that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I actually wrote this script in the early year of 2019, and I'm just now finishing it and making it public to the world. And it was a point in my life when I thought that I would never get this video out published, because I was always too afraid to express my thoughts, express my opinions, express my views and my outtakes on how I look at things to the world. And with this quarantine stuff, it made me realize that I'm sitting here wasting my time with the material that I have, instead of me putting it out here towards the world and letting you guys view what I have to offer. And I just want to say thank you guys for watching the video until this point, and even checking the video out. I know this is my first video, and I know I've probably said some things, or I sound really weird and awkward, or I don't sound that very convincing and satisfied and confident in myself to upload this video. But this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. I convinced myself that I'm no longer going to play around and beat around the bush. And I really appreciate you guys for standing along so far in this video. And if you're listening to this part right here, I just want to say I'm really appreciative and thankful for you guys who are still around. Even if you're not still around during this point, just thank you for clicking on the video and being somewhat interested in it. And it means a lot to have people out here who support my content. And I'm very thankful for guys like you, because it will be people like you in the future that will continue to push me on and keep me motivated to create more videos like this. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for and for just staying throughout the video throughout this course of duration. If you like this video, I'm normally not one to beg or ask for anything, but I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, and just comment what's your interpretation of the show. And just comment anything that could help me get better at this. Comment anything that could help me I can expand upon. Comment anything that can help me become better at this in the future, because I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have to say. And more importantly, I'm really interested in making great content for you guys, while also learning from my previous mistakes that I can expand upon and create better content in the future. And I just want to say thank you guys so much once again. And if you're still in the video at this point, just insanely 100 times thank you so much for continuing to watch this video. And just thank you for everything, and I really appreciate it. And until next time, this is the end, and I will see you guys later on. Peace out, and you guys take care.